14 kids vanished on a school trip in 2007. 18 years later, what they found changes everything. In the spring of 2007, a group of 14 middle school children from a small town in Oregon went on a school trip to Black Hollow Forest, a dense woodland known for its history of strange disappearances. They boarded a yellow school bus, laughing, carrying their lunchboxes, and excited for the adventure. But they never came back. The bus driver, their teacher, and every child vanished without leaving a trace. The only evidence ever recovered was the school bus, found abandoned at the edge of the forest. Inside the bus, the seats were perfectly intact, but the children's backpacks and jackets were left behind, as if they had simply walked away and never returned. For 18 years, the case haunted the town. Families kept their kids indoors. The police searched, rescue teams scoured the forest, psychics claimed to know the answer, and even FBI investigators were called. Yet, not a single footprint, bone, or clue ever surfaced. It was as if the children had evaporated into thin air. Whispers grew over the years, of strange lights in the forest, of eerie cries heard at night, and of an old legend tied to Black Hollow. The forest takes what it wants. Then, in 2025, everything changed. A construction team, clearing land near the forest, unearthed a hidden underground tunnel system. Inside, they found something chilling. 14 small wooden carvings lined neatly on the walls, each carved with the name of one missing child. The carvings were fresh, as if made recently, not 18 years ago. But the most shocking discovery came deeper inside. On a damp stone floor, investigators found 14 pairs of children's shoes, not decayed, but perfectly preserved, as though time had frozen. DNA testing confirmed they belonged to the vanished kids. The tunnel stretched far into the forest, with strange symbols painted in red, leading to a sealed chamber. When authorities finally opened it, they found evidence of something no one could explain: remnants of food, handprints on the walls, and children's drawings showing scenes no child should have seen: rituals, shadows, and eyes watching from the trees. The question wasn't just what happened to those kids, but why their stories seemed far from over. Because the final chilling detail was a fresh message scratched into the stone. We are still here. The beginning of the trip. The morning of the school trip in 2007 began like any other in the small town. Parents hurried their children out of the house, some holding half-eaten slices of toast, others clutching brightly colored lunchboxes. Excitement buzzed through the air because this wasn't just another school day. It was a day of adventure, a break from routine, a chance to explore Black Hollow Forest, which most children had only heard about in whispers. At the schoolyard, the yellow bus stood gleaming under the morning sun, its engine humming softly. One by one, the 14 children climbed aboard, their voices rising in a chorus of laughter and chatter. Some pressed their faces against the window, waving to their parents, while others were already exchanging snacks or joking about who would be the first to get lost on the hiking trail. Among them were best friends who promised to stick together no matter what, shy kids who usually kept to themselves but felt the pull of adventure, and a teacher, a young woman named Ms. Carter, who had organized the trip with the hope of sparking curiosity about nature. Sitting quietly at the wheel was Mr. Dawson, the bus driver, a kind man in his late 50s who had driven the children safely to school for years. The parents stood by the roadside, waving as the bus began to roll away. Some mothers shouted last-minute reminders, "Don't forget your water bottle," or "Stay with the group," while fathers lifted their hands in silent waves. None of them imagined that this would be the last time they'd see those cheerful faces peering out of the glass. Inside the bus, the atmosphere was electric. Children played small games, tossed paper balls across the aisle, and sang along to songs that only kids their age knew by heart. The teacher tried to calm them down, reminding them to save their energy for the hike, but even she couldn't help smiling at their boundless excitement. After all, trips like these were meant to create memories, moments the children would talk about for years to come. The journey out of town was filled with sunlight and laughter. The bus rumbled past familiar houses, quiet fields, and then towards the tree line of Black Hollow Forest. As the forest loomed closer, its tall, Dark canopies stretched like a wall across the horizon. Some children pressed their noses to the window, whispering about the legends their older siblings had told them. Ghost stories, strange lights, voices at night. One boy pointed to the shadowy entrance of the forest and joked that it looked like a mouth ready to swallow them whole. His friends laughed, but Miss Carter quickly hushed them, reminding the children that stories were only stories. Still, her eyes lingered a little longer on that dark expanse, as though she, too, felt the weight of something unspoken hanging in the air. The bus slowed as it approached the narrow dirt road that led into the forest. Gravel crunched under the tires, and the sound of the engine echoed strangely between the tall trees. For a moment, conversation inside the bus softened, as if the children instinctively knew they were entering a place where laughter wasn't supposed to be so loud. Yet, excitement quickly returned. The kids rummaged through their backpacks, pulling out binoculars, disposable cameras, and snacks they had been saving. One little girl proudly showed off her notebook, where she planned to sketch every tree and flower she saw. The teacher's heart swelled with pride as she imagined how this trip would become a treasured memory for them all. And so, with every mile deeper into Black Hollow Forest, the children leaned forward in their seats, eyes wide, ready for a day of discovery. The yellow bus carried with it the sounds of joy, innocence, and unbroken trust. Yet not a single child, parent, or teacher knew that this very ride was not leading them to adventure, but to silence, the sudden vanishing. By early afternoon, the bus should have returned. Parents gathered outside the school gates, some leaning against their cars, others standing in small groups, exchanging casual conversation. At first, no one was worried. School trips often ran late. Maybe the children had taken longer on the trail, or perhaps the bus had made a stop on the way back. The air was light with expectation, not fear. Minutes turned into an hour, and unease began to ripple through the waiting crowd. Mothers checked their watches over and over. Fathers made impatient calls to the school office. "Where are they? Why isn't the bus here yet?" One asked, but no clear answer came. The teacher's phone rang endlessly, but no one picked up. The driver, too, was unreachable. It was as if the bus had vanished between one breath and the next. By late evening, the first wave of panic hit. Police cars rolled into the school parking lot, sirens silenced, their flashing lights reflecting off the anxious faces of parents. Officers reassured everyone, saying there was probably a breakdown or a detour, but their tone betrayed an edge of doubt. After all, how could a full-sized bus simply disappear without contacting anyone? The search began along the main roads first. Patrol cars scoured the highways, rescue teams checked gas stations, and helicopters hovered overhead, scanning the winding paths that led out of town. And then, just as darkness began to settle, someone spotted it. The yellow bus, parked at the edge of Black Hollow Forest, its headlights off, engine silent, windows dark. Relief surged through the waiting families, but that relief was short-lived. When officers boarded the bus, they found it completely empty. The seats were neat, not a single sign of struggle, not a drop of blood or a torn scrap of fabric. Yet scattered across the seats were the children's backpacks, half-opened lunchboxes, jackets draped casually over armrests. It was as if the children had stood up and walked away in the middle of laughter. The eerie stillness inside the bus unnerved even the most hardened investigators. A juice box still dripped onto the floor, as though abandoned only minutes ago. A sketchbook lay open on one seat, a flower half-drawn in pencil. A half-eaten sandwich sat on another seat, untouched, waiting for an owner who would never return to claim it. When searchlights lit up the ground outside the bus, officers expected to find footprints leading into the forest. But there were none. The soft earth around the bus was undisturbed. No scuff marks, no broken branches, no sign that 14 children and 2 adults had stepped out at all. The bus looked less like a vehicle that had been exited and more like a stage after its actors had been erased from existence. The silence of the forest pressed heavily against the searchers. Radios crackled with nervous voices, and dogs brought in for the search whimpered, refusing to move past the tree line. Some officers muttered under their breath that it felt like the woods themselves were watching. No one wanted to say it aloud, but everyone felt it, that the children had not simply walked off. Something else had taken place here. Parents who arrived at the scene cried out in anguish, rushing toward the bus only to be held back by officers. Mothers pressed their faces against the windows, sobbing at the sight of their children's belongings inside. Fathers shouted for answers, their voices trembling with rage and fear. The question echoed over and over again, where are they? And yet, as night deepened and the forest stood tall and silent beside the abandoned bus, no one had an answer. 14 children and 2 adults had vanished without sound, without trace, without warning. The world seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something unspeakable to reveal itself, the endless search. The search began that very night, as officers pushed deeper into Black Hollow Forest with flashlights cutting through the darkness. The beams quivered as branches swayed overhead, shadows stretching unnaturally across the forest floor. Every rustle of leaves, every distant cry of an owl, made hearts race faster. Parents clung to each other, watching from the edges, praying for a sign of their children. At dawn, the real operation began. Search and rescue teams arrived with bloodhounds, drones, and volunteers from surrounding towns. The forest was divided into grids, and hundreds of people combed through the undergrowth, calling the children's names. The air was filled with shouts of Emma, Jason, Lily, but no voices ever called back. Only silence, heavy and suffocating, answered them. Helicopters hovered overhead, their spotlights sweeping across the dense canopy. But from above, the forest looked like an endless sea of green, impenetrable and secretive. From the ground, teams marked trees with bright tape to avoid losing their own way, as compasses spun strangely, giving conflicting directions. It was as though the forest itself wanted them lost. Days turned into weeks. Newspapers ran front-page headlines. 14 children missing, vanished without trace. National TV crews set up outside the forest, broadcasting images of crying parents and exhausted searchers. FBI agents took control, setting up a command post, bringing in specialized equipment. Still, not a single shoe, scrap of clothing, or fingerprint emerged. The case baffled everyone. The dogs that had been trained to track missing people behaved in ways no one could explain. They would bark furiously at certain parts of the forest, refusing to go forward, as though something unseen terrified them. In other areas, they sat quietly, tails down, whimpering, staring into empty spaces where nothing visible stood. Their handlers exchanged worried looks, but said little. Searchers began to whisper among themselves. Some claimed they heard faint laughter echoing between the trees. Others swore they saw flashes of movement, small figures darting between shadows. One man even reported hearing children singing, though when the group rushed to the sound, it dissolved into silence. Officials dismissed these stories as exhaustion and stress, but the rumors spread quickly. The forest revealed strange clues that only deepened the mystery. Small handprints were found on tree trunks far from the bus, but they led nowhere, fading as suddenly as they appeared. A child's ribbon fluttered from a branch 30 feet in the air, impossible for any child to have reached. Investigators photographed everything, but explanations slipped through their fingers like smoke. As weeks dragged on, search parties dwindled. Volunteers had to return to jobs, and even the most determined parents grew weary, collapsing under the weight of hopelessness. Yet, some refused to give up. Fathers camped at the forest's edge, swearing they would not leave until their children were found. Mothers placed candles in their windows every night, waiting for a knock that never came. The official search lasted 6 months. By then, the case had grown cold in the eyes of the authorities. Files piled high on desks, evidence was cataloged, and theories clashed. Some spoke of kidnappings, others of cult rituals, and a few whispered of supernatural forces. Still, there was no proof of anything, only a void where answers should have been. And so, the endless search stretched from days into years. What began as hope slowly transformed into obsession for some and despair for others. Black Hollow Forest stood untouched, unbroken, as if guarding its secret jealously. The children were gone, yet not forgotten, and their absence was a wound the town could never close the fear that gripped the town. In the weeks following the disappearance, the small town changed in ways no one could have imagined. Streets that once rang with the laughter of children now echoed with silence. Parents kept their kids indoors, refusing to let them play outside after school. Front yards that once displayed bicycles and jump ropes now stood empty, as if childhood itself had been stolen along with those who vanished. At night, the town grew unnaturally quiet. Porch lights that used to flicker off by bedtime now stayed lit until dawn, casting long shadows across empty sidewalks. Some families left their televisions or radios on through the night, desperate to drown out the silence that reminded them too much of Black Hollow Forest. Conversations in grocery stores and churches grew hushed, whispers replacing normal chatter. Neighbors who once spoke warmly to one another now exchanged glances heavy with suspicion. Some believed a human hand was behind the disappearance, a kidnapper, or worse, a cult operating in secret. Others insisted no human explanation could account for what had happened. Children who hadn't been on the trip began to suffer nightmares. They told their parents of dreams where they saw their classmates standing among tall trees, faces pale, eyes empty. Some woke screaming, convinced they heard their missing friends calling their names from the dark. Parents dismissed the stories, but their eyes betrayed the truth. They feared it too. Schools struggled to continue. Empty desks in classrooms stood as constant reminders of those who had vanished. Teachers found it impossible to maintain lessons as children stared at the seats where their friends once sat. The principal ordered the desks removed, but that only deepened the grief. Parents pulled their children from field trips entirely, and the forest was banned from any school activities. Shops near the forest closed early, owners refusing to stay after dark. Hunters and hikers abandoned the woods, though a few brave, or reckless, souls ventured in, hoping to find clues. Most returned shaken, whispering about strange sounds, moving shadows, or a sense of being watched. Some never returned at all, fueling rumors that the forest demanded more than just the 14 children. The town's police department became a fortress of unanswered questions. Officers patrolled constantly, but their presence offered little comfort. Parents gathered outside the station, demanding updates, but the truth was brutal. There were no new leads, no fresh evidence, and no sign of the missing. The silence of official statements only fueled the town's unrest. Religious leaders spoke of curses, divine punishment, or sins of the town that had brought darkness upon their children. Candlelight vigils were held, drawing hundreds who prayed in trembling voices. Some swore they felt the presence of the missing during these gatherings, a brush of cold wind or the faint echo of laughter just beyond the circle of light. Fear soon turned to paranoia. Strangers passing through the town were met with hostility, accused of knowing something or being connected to the vanishings. Rumors spread like wildfire, of secret tunnels, of government experiments, of families who had long-hidden dark secrets. Theories multiplied, but none brought comfort. And so, the town lived in the shadow of the forest, its heartbeat slower, its joy stolen. Parents clutched their children tighter, children grew up faster, and the missing 14 became a ghostly presence in every home, every street, every whispered conversation. Fear had gripped the town, and it would not let go. The legend of Black Hollow. Long before the children vanished, Black Hollow Forest already carried a reputation that made locals uneasy. Generations of townsfolk had whispered about it, their voices lowering whenever its name was mentioned. It wasn't just another stretch of wilderness. It was a place wrapped in superstition, where stories lingered like fog on the treetops. Elders in the town often spoke of the forest as if it were alive. They claimed it could breathe, that the wind inside it didn't sound like ordinary wind, but like whispers threading through the leaves. Some even said the trees leaned closer when you entered, as though they were listening. To many, these were only tales meant to scare children into staying away, but others swore they were true. One of the oldest legends spoke of a spirit known as the Watcher of the Woods. According to the story, the Watcher demanded offerings every few decades, taking people, especially children, who wandered too far. In return, the forest remained fertile, its animals plentiful, its streams pure. If the Watcher was denied, crops failed and sickness spread. Folklore tied the Watcher to a tragedy from over a century ago, when an entire family reportedly vanished while living in a cabin deep inside the forest. Searchers found the cabin abandoned, meals still on the table, beds neatly made, but not a trace of the family. Carved into the cabin wall was a single message: the forest keeps what it takes. Hunters shared tales of seeing pale figures among the trees at dusk, figures too small and swift to be adults, their laughter echoing faintly before vanishing into silence. Some insisted these were the spirits of children taken long ago, forever wandering the forest, neither alive nor truly gone. These stories were dismissed as drunken exaggerations, yet they refused to die. Stranger still were the reports of time behaving differently in Black Hollow. Campers claimed their watches would stop or skip hours. Hikers would walk for what felt like minutes, only to discover they had lost an entire day. Families who picnicked near the forest's edge swore that sounds inside didn't match the rhythm of the outside world. Crickets chirped at noon. Birds fell silent at dawn, as if nature itself bent under some unseen force. Some of the town's oldest residents remembered stories passed down from native tribes who once lived in the region. They warned outsiders never to build near Black Hollow, calling it a thin place where the barrier between worlds was weak. Spirits, they said, slipped freely through that veil, claiming what they desired from the living. Children growing up in town traded these stories like treasures. Dares to step into the forest at night became tests of bravery. They would stand at the tree lean, daring each other to go deeper, to listen for voices, to bring back a stone or branch as proof. Most never ventured more than a few steps before fear dragged them back. Even adults weren't immune to the forest's hold. Farmers avoided planting near its edge, and hunters often skipped the richest areas of game rather than risk stepping inside. Black Hollow was not marked on tourist maps, and though it stretched for miles, it remained curiously untouched by development. It was as if the town collectively agreed to let it remain exactly as it was, untamed, unbroken, and feared. So when the bus carrying the 14 children was found abandoned at the edge of Black Hollow, the town's whispers grew louder. The old stories returned with force, no longer silly bedtime tales, but possible explanations. Some said the Watcher had finally taken its due. Others claimed the forest had called the children in. What had once been legend now felt chillingly close to truth. 18 years of silence. As the years passed, the forest kept its secret. Days turned into months, and months blurred into years, but no trace of the missing children surfaced. The town remained trapped in a cycle of grief, always waiting, always hoping, but the silence from Black Hollow was unbroken, heavy as a shadow that refused to lift. By the second year, investigators admitted what parents had feared most. There were no new leads. Case files piled high on shelves, reports grew dustier, and evidence boxes remained untouched. For all the technology, manpower, and effort poured into the search, the result was the same: nothing. The children seemed to have vanished into a void. Families struggled in different ways. Some clung desperately to hope, keeping bedrooms untouched, beds neatly made, toys arranged just as they had been the day their children left. Others, unable to bear the sight of those empty spaces, packed away belongings in boxes they could not bring themselves to open. Hope and despair lived side by side in every home. Birthdays were the hardest. Parents lit candles on cakes, sometimes alone, sometimes surrounded by neighbors trying to offer comfort. Chairs sat empty at dining tables, their absence louder than any words spoken. Some families celebrated quietly, others refused to acknowledge the dates at all, but in every case, the missing children remained a wound that never healed. The town itself aged under the weight of unanswered questions. Murals were painted on brick walls in memory of the missing. Plaques were nailed to trees near the forest's edge. Each year, candlelight vigils were held, where faces glowed in the flicker of flames, voices trembling as prayers were whispered into the night air. Yet year after year, the forest gave nothing back. Whispers of the supernatural grew louder. Some swore they still heard children's laughter drifting from the forest on certain nights. Others claimed to see figures standing just inside the tree line, unmoving, watching with eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. These stories were brushed aside as imagination, but they returned often enough that people began to avoid the forest altogether. Over time, new families moved into town, unaware of the depth of the tragedy. But they too quickly learned. Older residents spoke cautiously of the vanished 14, warning newcomers not to let their children wander near the forest. Black Hollow became more than a landmark. It was a scar, a place avoided, spoken of only in hushed tones. Meanwhile, the parents who had lost their children carried the silence within them. Some marriages broke under the strain. Others became unshakable, bound by shared grief. A few families moved away, unable to face the daily reminders. Yet even in distant cities, the absence followed them like a shadow that could not be escaped. Every so often, rumors of new evidence surfaced. A hiker thought he saw a child's shoe. A hunter swore he heard voices in the woods. Each time, hope surged briefly, search parties were sent, but nothing was ever found. It became a cruel cycle, brief sparks of belief, followed by crushing silence. By the 18th year, silence had hardened into something almost unbearable. The missing were no longer just children. They had become legends, mysteries that haunted the town's collective memory. And while time had dulled some of the pain, it had also deepened the terror of one truth. Black Hollow had taken them, and it had never given them back. The unexpected discovery. 18 years after the children vanished, most people believed the mystery would remain unsolved forever. Then, in the summer of 2025, everything changed. A construction crew working near the outskirts of Black Hollow began clearing ground for a new roadway. The forest had been avoided for so long that few dared disturb it, but progress demanded expansion. What they unearthed that day, however, was not progress, it was horror. As heavy machinery tore into the earth, the blade of a bulldozer struck something solid. At first, workers assumed it was stone, but when they began digging by hand, they uncovered a narrow opening, a tunnel hidden beneath years of dirt and vines. The air that seeped out was cold and damp, carrying with it a faint, unsettling smell that no one could quite place. The workers called in local authorities, who quickly sealed off the site. Within hours, investigators descended into the tunnel with flashlights and cameras. The passage was narrow, walls damp with moisture, the silence so thick that every footstep echoed like a drum. The deeper they went, the more it felt as though the earth itself was swallowing them whole. About 20 feet inside, the team made their first chilling discovery. Along the tunnel walls were wooden carvings, each carefully etched into the stone. They weren't random marks, they were names. 14 names. Every single one matched a child who had vanished on the school trip in 2007. The letters looked freshly carved, sharp and unweathered, as though made only days before. Investigators froze. The realization hit them all at once. Someone or something had kept the memory of the children alive in this hidden place. Cameras clicked rapidly, documenting every detail, but the air grew heavier with each photograph. It was no longer just a tunnel. It was a shrine, a reminder of what had been taken. Farther inside, they found something even more unsettling. 14 pairs of children's shoes lay neatly arranged in a row on the damp stone floor. The shoes were not worn down, not rotted, not decayed by time. Instead, they looked almost new, as though the children had only just slipped them off before vanishing into the darkness. DNA testing later confirmed the shoes belonged to the missing children. But in that moment, the discovery itself felt impossible. How had they survived underground, untouched by 18 years of weather and time? Investigators whispered among themselves, their flashlights shaking as they scanned the chamber. The silence in the tunnel seemed alive, as though listening. The deeper they pressed, the stranger the findings became. Handprints, small and faint, covered patches of the walls. Drawings, crudely made with charcoal, showed strange figures, tall shadows with hollow eyes, standing among groups of children. Some of the sketches even depicted the yellow bus, parked just outside the forest. Then, in the deepest part of the tunnel, they found what would haunt them forever. Scratched into the stone, just above a sealed chamber door, were words written in jagged letters. "We are still here." The message was fresh, as if carved only hours earlier, the edges sharp and white against the dark rock. The team stood frozen, their flashlights trembling on the words. No one spoke. Some swore they heard the faint echo of children's laughter drifting from behind the sealed chamber door. Others insisted it was only their imagination. But all of them knew, in that moment, that the silence of the past 18 years had been broken, and what lay ahead was far darker than anyone had ever imagined. Evidence of their presence. When investigators pushed deeper into the tunnel system, they began to notice details that made their skin crawl. This was no ordinary cave. It bore the unmistakable signs of habitation. The damp walls were smudged with the touch of small hands, as though children had once run their palms along the stone while passing through. The marks were too low for adults, perfectly aligned with the height of the missing students. In one chamber, they discovered remnants of food, crumbled crackers, fragments of wrappers, and even a rusted thermos still half full with liquid long turned foul. The items were traced back to the very year of the disappearance. Somehow, they had survived nearly 2 decades underground, preserved in the chill of the tunnels. The evidence was undeniable. The children had been here. More disturbing were the drawings. Charcoal sketches scrawled across the stone showed images no child should have drawn. In one, stick figures of children stood in a circle while towering black shapes surrounded them, shapes with long arms and hollow eyes. In another, a school bus was etched, flames curling from its windows, though no fire had ever touched the real vehicle. The most haunting drawings, however, were of faces, dozens of them, etched over and over, staring out from the walls. Some were smiling, some weeping, others twisted into expressions of fear. The chilling part was that several of the faces matched photographs of the missing children, their likenesses unmistakable even in crude lines. Handprints covered the stone as though pressed in desperation. Some smeared down the walls, as if children had slid to the floor while trying to hold on. Others were clustered tightly together, layered one over the other, like a group huddling in the dark. Investigators measured the prints, every one. Belonged to hands far too small to be grown adults. In a corner of one chamber, they found something even stranger. A collection of small objects had been stacked neatly into piles. Buttons, ribbons, broken pencils, even a stuffed toy, its once bright fabric now dulled with age. It looked like an offering, or perhaps a shrine, built by children who had clung to fragments of their old lives. What unsettled investigators most was the condition of these belongings. None were coated in the thick dust expected after 18 years underground. Instead, they looked recently handled, as though someone had been there only days before. The stuffed toys still held the faint smell of fabric softener, impossibly fresh after so many years. Cameras captured every detail, but the deeper they explored, the stronger the feeling grew that they were intruding on something that did not want to be disturbed. Some officers reported hearing faint whispers echoing down the tunnels, though no one else was speaking. A few even claimed they felt the tug of a small hand brushing against their own in the darkness. Then came the most shocking detail. Scratched into the dirt floor of one chamber were numbers. Investigators counted carefully. 14 sets, written side by side in childish scrawls. Each matched the exact age of the missing children in 2007, frozen as if they had never grown older, never left this place. Standing among the evidence, the searchers realized that this was not just a tomb, nor merely a place where children had been taken. It was a place where their presence lingered, impossibly alive, suspended between past and present. And though the chambers were silent, the walls told a story of voices that had never truly gone away. The message that changed everything. Deeper inside the tunnels, investigators stumbled upon a discovery that froze them in their tracks. On the stone walls, written in jagged lines of what appeared to be charcoal mixed with something darker, were messages, dozens of them. At first glance, they looked like random scribbles, but the more carefully the words were studied, the clearer their meaning became. The first message was simple, carved into the wall with shaky hands. "We are not lost." Those 4 words carried an unsettling weight. For 18 years, everyone had believed the children vanished without a trace. But here, in their own writing, was proof that they had tried to communicate. They had wanted to be found, or perhaps to warn whoever entered after them. Further along the tunnel, more inscriptions appeared. Some were written in full sentences, others broken into fragments, as if written in a rush. One read, "Don't follow the voices." Another said, "They come when the lights go out." Investigators, hardened by years of crime scenes and mysteries, found themselves whispering these words aloud, their voices trembling. What made the writings even more disturbing was their freshness. Though 18 years had passed, the letters on the wall were not faded or weathered. They looked as though they had been written only days ago. Experts couldn't explain it. No chalk, no paint, no ink should have lasted this long underground. Yet the markings glistened in the flashlight beams, sharp and new. One chamber contained what seemed to be a desperate plea, scrawled in uneven handwriting across nearly the entire wall. "Help us. We're still here." The letters were large, uneven, some smeared as if the writer's hand had trembled or been pulled away midward. Investigators stood in silence, the message gnawing at their nerves. If the children were still here, where had they gone? Among the chilling words, investigators noticed strange symbols mixed into the writing. Circles with slashes, crude stick figures, and what looked like tall shadowy forms drawn over and over again. Some of the messages seemed to reference these figures. They watch from the dark. Don't look at their eyes. The implication was undeniable. The children had seen something that haunted them in these tunnels. They documented the walls. One investigator swore the messages shifted when no one was watching. Letters seemed sharper, words slightly altered, as though they were alive, rewriting themselves in the shadows. His claim was dismissed at first, but when others began noticing subtle differences between photographs and the real markings, a ripple of fear spread through the team. Near the end of the tunnel, investigators found the most haunting message of all. Scratched deep into the stone with what looked like fingernails, it read, "We hear you too." The words were carved lower to the ground, at a child's height, the grooves fresh and raw. Whoever wrote, it wanted their presence to be undeniable, and the fact it addressed outsiders directly was chilling. Some team members refused to go any further. They felt the walls were not just telling a story, but responding as if the children, or whatever remained of them, were aware of the intruders. Every step deeper into the tunnels felt like crossing into a place where time no longer followed rules, where messages weren't frozen in the past, but still being written in the present. Standing in silence, the investigators realized the weight of what they had uncovered. These messages weren't random scratches on stone. They were communication. They were warnings. They were proof that something was still alive in the darkness. And with every word etched into the walls, the mystery of what happened to the 14 children only grew darker, more impossible, and far more terrifying, the ongoing mystery. After the tunnels were discovered, the investigation should have brought closure to families who had waited 18 long years. But instead, it only deepened the mystery. Every new piece of evidence contradicted the last, leaving more questions than answers. It wasn't just a cold case anymore. It had become something beyond explanation, something that hovered between crime and legend. The The authorities sealed the forest and restricted access to the tunnels, but rumors spread quickly. Locals claimed that late at night, strange lights flickered beneath the ground, glowing faintly through cracks in the soil. Others swore they had heard laughter, children's laughter, echoing through the trees, vanishing as quickly as it came. Fear of the Black Hollow grew, even among those who had once dismissed the case as a tragedy long buried. Forensic teams continued to analyze the artifacts found inside: the shoes, the drawings, the handprints. What baffled experts most was their condition. Objects should have deteriorated after nearly 2 decades underground, yet they hadn't. Some were so well preserved that they seemed untouched by time. The evidence suggested something impossible, that the children had either never left the tunnels, or that someone or something had carefully kept their memory alive. Psychologists brought in to study the drawings were left unsettled. The depictions of shadowy figures weren't random doodles. They were consistent, deliberate, repeated by different hands. One expert noted that the sketches resembled folkloric depictions of watchers or keepers, entities said to exist between worlds. The fact that children, isolated and terrified, had drawn them with such detail made the theory even more disturbing. Families of the missing refused to accept official silence. They demanded answers. Were their children alive? Were the tunnels a prison, or something else entirely? Authorities could not say. DNA evidence tied the artifacts to the children, but no remains were ever found. Without bodies, without closure, the families were left in a cruel limbo, trapped between hope and despair. Even investigators who had worked the original case began to question what they knew. Some admitted privately that the evidence suggested the children's presence was ongoing, as though they still existed in some form within the tunnels. But to speak those words publicly risked ridicule and disbelief, so the most chilling possibilities were left unspoken. Meanwhile, strange occurrences plagued those who had entered the tunnels. Several reported vivid nightmares of being chased in the dark, their dreams filled with children's voices calling their names. Others experienced waking hallucinations, seeing handprints appear on fog glass, hearing knocks on walls at night, or feeling the brush of small fingers against their skin when no one was near. The most unsettling detail came from the photographs taken inside. Analysts reviewing the images noticed anomalies. Faint outlines of children standing in the shadows, blurred as though moving at impossible speed. In some frames, pale faces stared directly at the camera, though no one in the investigation team remembered seeing anyone there at the time. Despite mounting evidence, the tunnels were eventually resealed, officially labeled unsafe for further exploration. But locals whispered that the real reason was far more chilling. Investigators feared that whatever had taken the children was still there, waiting. To open the tunnels again might not just uncover the truth, it might unleash it. And so, the mystery of the 14 vanished children remains unsolved. The names on the wall, the warnings, the laughter in the trees, all of it lingers like a shadow that refuses to fade. Black Hollow became more than a location. It became a symbol of unanswered questions, a reminder that some disappearances do not end with closure, but with silence that grows darker with every passing year.